Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Ben Kinsley is joining me tonight as co-host. Ben, how are you?
Good, thanks, Pat.
We have to stop this remote stuff, Ben. I don't like it.
I'm just getting used to it.
Oh, no, no. I like face to face. But anyway, our special guest this evening is John Sales, who is the CEO of the Vermont Foodbank. And I know he's been a little busy these days, and I wanted to touch base with him. He's been on the show before. We're going to talk about COVID-19, about hunger in Vermont, and about my least favorite subject of food sufficiency, or in this case, insufficiency. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Pat and Ben. It's great to be here. Great to be back.
Oh, nice to see you. Good to be seen, as we say these days in COVID land.
Good to be seen.
So, John, you've been on the show before. We always ask our guests to share a little bit about your background and what brought you to the Vermont Food Bank, and how long have you been there? You've been there quite a while.
Quite a while now. Yes, this is my 12th year at the Vermont
Good
Food
for you.
Bank. Yeah, thank you. Or maybe my 13th year. I've been there for 12 years. I came actually from the place that I met you, Pat. I worked for state government in Vermont for
Right?
about 9 years. And before that, I came from Maryland, where I grew up and went to college and worked and was
Yes.
working as a lawyer, and came here to work at the Public Service Department as a utility lawyer, and kind of found myself here. It was time to make a change, and I wanted to keep helping Vermonters, and was really fortunate to be able to land at the Vermont Food Bank, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, well, I know you have done an amazing job. Everybody I talk to, my little circle, Mary Moulton, now Sue Minter, and everybody that thinks you have just done a magnificent job. And I'm sure the people that you serve feel just the same. And you've got a great staff, by the way.
That's who I'm going to credit. I've got an
Yeah,
amazing team at the food bank, and just people who are really devoted to the mission, and that's
right.
really what it's all about.
Well, there you go.
Important stuff.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in and talk about what the food bank does, and more specifically, what you've been doing for the last year or so as we're trying to hold the world together here.
Yeah. So we are the only food bank in Vermont, and we have a vision of a Vermont where everyone has access to enough food every day, where everyone in Vermont is healthy, and where everyone in Vermont takes action to end hunger and poverty. And that can be, people listening to this program, that can be lawmakers passing laws or policies that help make food more accessible. That can be people making donations to the food bank. We are a private 501c3 organization. And then it is donations that power the work we do. And it can be people who actually need help, who are walking into a food shelf or going to a food site. That is taking action to end hunger and poverty, and supporting families so people can be healthy and engaged in their communities, which is what we all want.
That's great. That's excellent. I was checking out your website, which is very good, by the way. And I noticed, obviously, we're going to talk about all the services you provide, but there was one service that just really struck me, because we've been hearing about the collective a lot. So you had down the collective impact, and we've heard about COVID, about herd immunity. And in the legislature now, the buzzword is crowdsourcing. And you would hear that from Commerce and Community Development. That's their new buzzword. And so, could you talk about the collective impact and what that means to the food bank and to the people you serve?
Sure. Collective impact is a kind of a philosophy of how people and organizations work together. It's been around for a while, and there's particularly I'll talk about. There's an effort in the Northeast Kingdom, and we've been involved in it for 7 or 8 years now. It's called NEK Prosper. And it's the food bank, it's the Agency on Aging, it's the Community Action Agency, it's the hospital, it's the schools, it's the transportation, it's the housing agency. Everyone coming together and sitting around the table and saying, hey, we're touching the lives of all the same people in our community. How can we communicate and work better with each other for the benefit of the people that we're serving? And it's really that simple. but in execution it's really challenging because you've got a bunch of people with different organizations and different missions and different focuses, and everyone needs to come together and figure out what can I do as the food bank to help the transportation agency do their job better. And what can the community action agency do to work with the schools and the hospital to help them do their jobs better? So it really takes a shift in focus, which I think is really healthy and something I've seen actually in as we've been dealing with COVID is organizations all across the state are really shifting and thinking less about themselves and more about all the people in the state that may need help or assistance, and how can we work together to do that.
I think it sounds like a very good effort because working together has always been a better approach. I think so. I love some of the buzzwords that you put in. That seems to be what I'm talking about tonight is buzzwords. But under the collective impact, you had shared community vision, evidence-based decision-making, collaborative action, investment and sustainability, where everybody's pulling their resources together and having an impact, which is great. I've always thought that the nonprofits should work more closely together. And I realize it's difficult because you said about different goals and stuff, but the people seem all to be the same that you're serving. And so
we've had there's a very intentional effort up there to have that shared vision for the community. And we talk about it a lot and we work on it. We have data that we look at to see if we're reaching our goals. And really it is about pooling money together and figuring out how can we make investments in the community that are gonna support people. A quick example is we pulled money together and did a pilot of a basically support for small businesses owned by women, and made investments in those businesses, and then are tracking them to see how those businesses are doing. And we had some of the women actually come in pre-COVID and talk to us about what impact the investments had on their businesses and growing them.
That's really great. Good for you. So does that have to do with, I had a note here about Caledonia Essex Accountable Health Community. Is that the NEK Food Bank or?
It is, we now call it NEK Prosper, but it's really the same effort in the same organizations.
Yeah. Too many words in the other name. So this is easier.
Condense, make concise, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can remember that.
Concise is nice. So, John, we had Sue Minter and Mary Moulton on the show for the last 6 months, and both of them shared that a number of Vermonters are experiencing food insufficiency. That number's gone up over the past year. Seems to be somewhere around 1 in 3 right now. Is that correct?
That's right. That's the latest data we have.
Latest data we have is about 1 in 3. Can you talk about how much those numbers have shifted over the past year and what the food bank has done in response to COVID? I mean, I think we've all seen pictures of some of these lines of cars that are miles long trying to pick up meals at kind of the start of this when everything shut down. Where are we today? It doesn't seem like that's still happening, but at least not in the same way. But where are we today, and how did we get from there to here?
Yeah, it was quite a shock to all of us. And, that those first few months, about 50% of the people in Vermont had some kind of job loss or economic disruption. And food security is financial security. It's just people, there's plenty of food. I mean, there were some issues with supply chains at the very beginning, but there's plenty of food out there, and it's just a matter of people having the money and the access to that food. And so those huge disruptions created huge need, and people were scared. We mobilized very, very quickly with the help of the state of Vermont and the National Guard, and you saw those long food lines. Well, we're actually still doing those distributions all across the state. It's been pretty much nonstop since May that those distributions have been going on, and right now we're doing 500. Actually, it's up to about 650 food boxes a day are being distributed across the state. We're just better at it now, so you're not seeing the long lines. But that 1 in 3 number you mentioned went up in February of last year. It was 1 in 10, and so the economic disruption was intense and immediate. We've probably seen some moderation in that. We don't have new numbers. UVM has been doing some studies, and we'll have some new numbers soon, but it's still pretty high when we haven't seen any real decrease in the number of people coming to food shelves and meal sites. In fact, the food bank supplies and partners with 300 partners around the state, including food shelves, meal sites, hospitals, and schools. We saw a 68% increase in the number of people going to food pantries in Vermont.
Wow.
And those partner pantries are still reporting those high numbers coming in. The food bank distributed about $4.5 million in purchased food and in cash grants to all those partners, to those 300 partners. So it was fees that we had that were waived. It was just going out and buying as much food as we get our hands on and making that available free to everybody. And our partner organizations, they have operating costs too. So we had lots of very generous people wanting to make sure that people in Vermont had food to eat, and so we wanted to make sure that our partners were there too. So that was about $1 million worth of cash grants have gone out so far to our partner agencies.
Haven't you? I'm sorry, John. Have you noticed? And I don't mean to interrupt you, but Vermonters in this time seem to me to be more generous than ever. I think because they figure there, but by the grace of God, I mean, my job could go away, things could happen, and they just seem to be. I work with a couple of nonprofits, and whenever we've done a fundraiser lately, it's exceeded our expectations.
Yeah, it's humbling, frankly.
Yeah, I agree.
Really is. And we've seen this happening in Vermont and also across the country. I'm part of a network of other 200 food banks all across the country. People are really stepping up. Now, I know there are some nonprofits that are really challenged right now, particularly folks who had to shut down, the arts and others. But we're all trying to work together. It's going to take us all to rebuild after this, and so we want to make sure that everyone is healthy. And I also think everyone being cooped up, people aren't spending money on vacations and travel and meals out, and I think people are being more generous because in some conditions there's just a little extra there, and they're seeing it's really right in front of us, all the challenges people are having, and so it's heartwarming and it's humbling.
And I think because of the way you're distributing food, people can see who are donating that the food, they see it going to the people that need help because it's so visible, it's out there. And I remember you and I talked one time about the kind of people that are going to food banks. Earlier on, there were guys in suits. I mean, this is not, you look at a McMansion and you have no idea what's going on behind the doors, because the first thing you cut back on is food. You can't cut back on the mortgage or the car payment or other things to keep the lights on, but food is sometimes the first thing you cut back on.
That's absolutely right, Pat. And it's great to have people like you who are out there in the community who understand these things because it's complex.
Yeah.
People have complex lives, and just to be able to state it that clearly and articulately, I think helps people understand and gives people more of a reason to help, frankly.
Right. Yeah, because it could be them, could be me.
Could be any of us.
Well, exactly. I'm sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Well, so you mentioned in passing there, I think you almost mentioned something about restaurants, and I know that restaurants have been hit pretty hard by the pandemic. That's one place that a lot of food has probably been diverted from the restaurant industry into other places. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, restaurants were participating in food prep for some of the food bank and food distribution activities. Is that still happening, or is that has that kind of passed along at this point?
Yeah, well, there was sort of a lot of stranded food at the very beginning, when all of a sudden every restaurant closed and there was all this food. And actually the food bank and some other nonprofits kind of swooped in, and we were able to purchase some of that food so it didn't go to waste and make sure that it got to people in need. Um, we worked with the restaurant industry. We worked actually a lot, very closely with Shift Meals, which was a project of the Skinny Pancake, and we're still doing some work with them, where we were having them prepare meals and distributing those, a lot of them to older Vermonters. I don't know if you're familiar with the SASH program, Support and
Yes.
Services at Home, but
Yep.
working with the SASH sites to get those meals out. And then the legislature funded Vermont Everyone Eats, which has been a real boost to restaurants. While it
Right.
doesn't, involve the food bank, involves a lot of our partners, and I'm on the statewide steering committee for that. And to be able to actually employ the restaurant workers to pay for meals that are
Right.
then going to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford those meals. It's been really popular, and it's been really successful. And I think it really adds to that feeling of all of us getting together and working together to support each other through a time that no one has ever experienced before.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, the two industries that have been hit hardest by the pandemic have been, food service and hospitality are like the two industries that have really been decimated by the conditions of the pandemic, and hopefully those industries will start regaining some traction later this year. But I mean, that's a major player when you start talking about how our food distribution has worked or traditionally has worked. And of course, like one of the first things that people start cutting back on in the pandemic, have a little extra cash in their pocket. They're not going out to eat, saving a little money. But that's also the flip side of that, is it's hurting our restaurants and those food providers.
And it's also a lot of the folks that we're serving. 40% of that surge of people going to food shelves and meal sites and food distributions are people who have never used the charitable food system before. And I think a lot of those are people in the food service and hospitality industry who generally it's a lower paid industry, folks without big financial cushions. And we want to continue to be here until everyone has the opportunity to get back to work safely.
Yeah, and I was so happy to hear about the relationship with the restaurants, that they were getting paid to make food, because it wasn't just the restaurant owner. It was the chefs and the people that helped prepare the food. They were being employed. So that was a great boom for everybody. I'm hoping that effort is going to keep some of the doors open, because we've seen around that some have closed.
Yeah, it actually has. We know that some of the restaurants have reported that 80% of their revenue in the last few months has come from that program.
That's great.
And there's a requirement that at least 10% of the food the restaurants are purchasing is local food. So it's also supporting our local farmers.
There you
and
go.
growers. Yeah.
Did we come up with that idea ourselves, Vermont, or is that something we borrowed from somebody? Do you know?
Others had been doing it, but we of course put our Vermont spin on it, and it's actually been, it was on the national news, and it's been highlighted the way Vermont has been doing this around the country.
Good for us. That's great. So I wanted to change the focus just a little bit, although talking about hunger. This was a year or two ago, back in June of 2020, you wrote a commentary that I read called Oppression and Hunger, and you talked about racial justice, and that this is what I love. At the end of the article, you asked a question, so what does racism have to do with hunger? And your answer was everything. And this is I know it was written in 2020, but it could have been written yesterday. It's very apropos for what we're dealing with these days. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Vermont Food Bank is on an equity and racial justice journey, because we we really believe that racism is one of the core reasons that hunger exists. And if we don't start addressing it, we're never going to really solve the hunger issue. So, first I would say, what do I mean when I say racism? And I would say the concept of race was created really to maintain one group's systemic power over another group and to marginalize that group. And the groups in power use customs and laws and set up systems to create a default state for that marginalized group. And that is usually economic poverty because they're keeping people from having opportunity, economic opportunity. To me, racism is the enforcement of that power dynamic using those laws and systems. There's a lot of out there about this person is a racist, that person is a racist. To me, people do take racist actions. There are systems that oppress people racially, and that's what to me is causing poverty, which is the cause of hunger. As I said, food insecurity is simply financial insecurity. So there's a lot behind that. We could spend a whole hour talking about that.
Yeah, I was going to say this takes more than a few minutes to talk about.
But really, at the core, that's it.
Well, it's interesting because exactly it ties back to what you said at the beginning, which is that in America anyway, we don't have a food system problem. We can deliver food. It's just the cost of food. So it becomes an economic problem, right? If you can afford food, you can get access to it. In America, there's other parts of the world where that may not be true, but but here that is the case. So really, you're right. Food insecurity is economic insecurity, and we know there's mountains of data that show that that people in those marginalized groups are have more financial insecurity because of those. In many cases, because of those systems that are in place, or because of generations of poverty that came before, and they just don't have those family resources to fall back on, those safety nets.
Right, and usually those generations of poverty exist because of those systems that were in place. For just one of the example that gets talked about a lot is the redlining in real estate, and how Black or other people of color were excluded from buying property, getting mortgages and buying property in places where that property would increase in value, and therefore just pretty much cut out of that kind of from World War II on, really World War I on, kind of the middle class boom of wealth creation by purchasing houses and selling houses, and that has consequences for people today, real consequences.
Yeah, and the only and this is again, we could do a whole episode on just this, but you're right, and one of the interesting things is the only tool to kind of push back on this that we've seen in the last 50 or 60 years was the GI Bill. That even came close to trying to level the playing field. But that wasn't specifically trying to level the playing field for marginalized groups. It was trying to level the playing field for people that were coming back out of the military, right? It just so happened.
There were actually some, it's a longer conversation, but there were some reasons why Black veterans coming back had less opportunity to take advantage and really benefit from the GI Bill. So, but again, that's the next show.
Yeah, exactly. John, do you remember, this is making me think back, there was a program that I attended. It was an exercise, and I think it was something about the bridges to poverty or something, where there were three groups. There were the very poor people, the middle class, and then the upper class. And you were put through a series of exercises, like this happened, and then you're supposed to respond. The outcome was that the poor people and the middle class helped each other and supported each other, whereas the upper class was eating at their table with the covers on the table. And it was such a dynamic impact on me and everybody else who did this program, because we did it ourselves without even thinking about it. We answered all the questions ourselves. I mean, it was very clear what happened during this exercise. I wish everybody in this state would go through that. And
Yeah,
I wish.
Yeah, bridges out of poverty.
I wish the legislature would do that. I do, because I talked about it when I was there. That would be a great enlightening moment for them. Anyway, so I wanted to keep going here. When you were talking about when you first got started, you had this farmers to family food box program, and you had a rough start with the vendor, and then got a new distribution contractor, and things seems to be working out now and getting the food out. And I do remember the 8-hour wait, or 5. Oh, that must be 5 or 8 hours. I remember at the airport. I think it was 5. Yeah, in Berlin. And the pictures were just, oh my God, it was amazing. But I think things have really worked out now for you and everybody, right? That's.
Yeah, we've got a system going, that program has been going on. There was a break in it in January and most of February, which the food bank actually filled in. We worked with the Abbey Group, which is a Vermont company, and
right.
created boxes, and actually are working with the legislature to use federal funds to pay for those.
Right.
But the program is ending at the end of May.
Oh.
So the USDA has decided to end that. We're going to be, again, filling in June through September. There will be another program. Now, this will be slightly different. It's going to be called Full Plate VT. But it will, because this is federal food, a different kind of federal food for which there's a income requirement. People will have to self-certify that their income is below 300% of the poverty level for their family size. So more details will be coming out about that, but there will still be food distributions similar to farmers to families going on from June through September.
Good, very good. Well, if we can help get the word out, we will, because
we'll let you know.
That's really, it's hard to get the word out here in Vermont. You would think we're so small that we'd be able to tell the neighbor who tells the neighbor, but some things just don't get out. And this would be important. Good for you. Hello, Mr. Ben.
Hello. So we'll see. We'll see. There's a lot of things we could talk about here. One interesting thing, and this was in headlines all over the place. Back in December, the food bank received a donation, which was a historic donation of $9 million from Mackenzie Scott, who is the former wife of Jeff Bezos, who's owns Amazon, or part of Amazon. So that's a kind of a historic investment in the food bank. What do you do with something like that? Do you give it out immediately? Do you try to make it last longer? Like, what do you do when you have such a historic donation of that magnitude?
Yeah, that's the perfect way to frame it. I think it was historic and it was unexpected, and we want to make sure, two things. The gift was what's called unrestricted. So Mackenzie Scott didn't tell us we had to spend it on any specific thing. The food bank can use its discretion to spend that. But the food bank is an organization that, in my view, is really owned by the people of Vermont. Those are the people that support us. They're our donors and our board members. So we want to make sure that we're having a conversation with Vermont about where this money should go.
Right.
The other thing is the Mackenzie Scott's giving has been largely focused on equity, whether it's racial justice or food justice. And so we want to honor that too in her gift. So we've been thinking a lot about this, as you might imagine, because we want to do it in a way that's going to be impactful. So right now the plan that we have is to put aside 2/3 of that money for really our core business. And that's to make sure that as the pandemic winds down, food insecurity is not going to wind down as quickly. Food insecurity is a leading and lagging indicator of a bad economy. This thing hit us like a ton of bricks, but it's going to take a long time for a lot of families to recover. And so we know we have to be there. So we'll put some of this money kind of aside, not aside. We're putting it to work, but making sure that next year and probably the year after that, we'll have the resources to continue serving people at a higher level than we have in the past. The other third is going to go in two different buckets. One is really, we call it going deeper in communities. So we work with 300 organizations all over the state, and they are the ones that are on the ground in every town and village in Vermont. So how can we partner more closely with them so that they can have a bigger impact in the work they're doing? A good example here in Central Vermont is Capstone Community Action.
Oh, yeah.
They've just started a project where they're doing food deliveries to the Orange Parent-Child Center, where we have lots of families that are struggling. And this way, when they go to pick up their kids at the end of the day, they can also pick up once a week or every other week some fresh food and maybe some shelf-stable food, making it more convenient and making it easier and supporting those families that are working to better their lives. And then there's also a transportation component to try and make it easier for people to get where they need to be. So we'll be investing in projects like that. And then the third bucket is innovative programs, and those are things that just money or food wouldn't solve. And there are things that the food bank itself can have a hand in. So an example there is there's a lot of work happening on home delivery now. I just talked about with the Orange Parent-Child Center. The food bank has the opportunity to pilot some software that will allow people to order ahead, so that they can, right now with these food boxes, you get what you get, but that doesn't always meet the needs. If you're lactose intolerant or vegan or gluten free, you're not necessarily getting the food that's right for you. And so this system would allow people to use their phone or go on their computer and actually see categories of food and order what they wanted, have that order fulfilled, kind of like a Blue Apron, and then pick that food up somewhere.
Great.
So and there's lots of opportunities for different innovative projects and lots of things happening in communities all over the state related to food insecurity. There's stuff in the Northeast Kingdom. There's a project in Bennington that's really interesting. There's things happening in Burlington with the New Americans community, and we're working with the migrant justice groups and making sure that our migrant farm workers have culturally appropriate and adequate food, because they're helping to feed us. So we're kind of breaking it out into buckets and looking at how can we have a longer term impact on Vermont and food security in Vermont.
Okay. How do you think Mackenzie Scott found you and found the Vermont? Because of your work on racial equity, do you think?
Well, that may be part of it. She had a whole team that were looking at organizations. There are 42 food banks around the country that got gifts.
Great.
And so I know that they were probably talking to our national organization, Feeding America. I honestly don't know how we got chosen, but I'm just really grateful. And again,
I was going to say thank you. So I just wanted to ask you a question, because you were talking about this pandemic being deeper and wider than you've ever seen before in any other similar, not so similar, but situations like this. And I think the challenge in front of you is just, when I saw that line at the airport, I thought, good grief, how do you even start to get this under control? Because people are needy, and food is one of those needs for sure. I was curious though, when you were talking about racial equity, was that, and you said we, and obviously, was that your unanimous from your board? How did you come to make that commitment?
Yeah, that's right.
Because I think that's important.
It's a great question. We started this work really in earnest, I think probably 3 years ago. But we've been talking about it longer than that at the food bank. When you look at data, it is clear that people in the BIPOC community Black, Indigenous, and other people of color um, have higher rates of food insecurity, higher rates of poverty, higher unemployment rates. It's clear that there is more need there, and as an organization that's trying to support people to live sustainable lives, we want to do that in a way that's giving, equitable as opposed to equal. Equitable is everyone has what they need to reach the outcomes that they're desiring. Equal is you just give everyone the same thing and see what happens.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we saw that as something that would have to be a transition for the food bank. And we realized that in order to really say to the community that we're supporting equity and we're supporting racial justice, we need to do that work internally first. We need to look at ourselves and see what are our feelings about racial justice. How do we feel about being, white people in a very white state, and what is actually happening on the ground in Vermont, in the place where we serve. And so we actually spent a couple of years doing that. And yes, the board is absolutely 100% on board with this, and encouraging us as an organization. We've made a lot of changes on how we do things internally, our personnel policies, how we pay people, how do people get leave, and just there's lots of little things. You talk about racism as a system. It's baked into every organization in this country, including ones that are trying to do good, like the Vermont Food Bank. And we have to be really intentional, particularly for me as a white person, be very intentional about understanding why we're doing what we're doing and what the impact of that is. And there's a lot of things that we can change easily. There's a lot of things that are really hard to change. Yeah. We'll keep working on both.
I think I'm glad that you and others are trying to work to educate, because I've told some friends of mine that I honestly don't understand a lot of what we're talking about. I don't, because I live in my little bubble, and I don't want people to be mad at me because it's not intentional. Just explain it to me. And I think some things are very hard to explain if you haven't experienced it or lived it. And I give your organization a lot of credit. That's great, John.
And I'll give credit to my staff too, who really have pushed me to be better at this.
Yeah.
And I encourage them to do that.
That's great. Good for you.
How do you? So first of all, I think that's great. I think you always have to go through some level of self-reflection before you, before you take an idea, out and ask other people to reflect those values, right? It's important to model that yourself. But how do we solve this issue if access to food is really an economic issue, and those economic issues are as driven by racism and these systems that we have in place. How do we change that?
Yeah, that is the $9 million question.
How happens you have that money?
Change that.
The way I think about it today, and it may be different tomorrow, is one day at a time. You look at just what happened in Minneapolis with the conviction in the George Floyd murder trial, and the reaction to that is a sense of relief, but also a sense of this is one Black life that mattered this one time in this one circumstance. And there already had been additional mass shootings, not having anything to do with law enforcement, and law enforcement related shootings, and racial components everywhere. We just have to keep working at this every single day. I was in a call earlier today with a bunch of colleagues from around the country, one in Oregon, and she said, what I'm learning now is that, racism will always be here. So there's no magic way to erase racism. So what we just need to do is put systems in place that are going to start addressing it. Our legislature is doing some things right now, which I really applaud them for. Small steps, but that's what we have to do. We have to keep taking small steps.
Keep taking small steps.
Yeah.
I think that that's I think the sentiment that I think a lot of people are feeling right now as they're observing events that are happening around the U.S. and the rest of the world is, the end goal is so far away or so far out of sight right now that it's hard to that comments like that of like, I don't see how we end this is totally understandable. And to a certain extent, you can't change human nature. There's a certain level of this that, that's, an us versus them mentality that's inherent to human nature. And that's what we're fighting against in a lot of ways. But we can't even get past, the violence piece. We haven't even gotten to a lot of the economic issues. We haven't even fixed the don't commit violence against BIPOC communities. Like we haven't even gotten past that piece of it yet to address the underlying economic issues.
Yeah, well, I think Pat talked about this, when she said, you don't have the life experience to understand the perspectives that people are bringing up. And I think, this is not a problem for the BIPOC community. This is a white people problem.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to comment when I first came to Vermont. I went to Bristol to the 4th of July parade. We were moving in there, and I'm looking around, thousands of people, and I went, there was something wrong with the crowd, and because I came from New York, and I realized that it was 1,000 of me. There was nobody else there, and what we miss out on boardrooms and meetings is that you need people from different backgrounds, different religions, different races, to bring ideas to the table, because they sometimes think about things a little bit differently, and it makes you challenge. You're challenged to respond back and to understand why they're recommending what they're recommending. I mean, you miss out on a lot because you're just hearing from yourself over and over again. Not that that's not bad, but I love to hear myself talk.
We have to re-examine our past too, and be willing to re-question the history that we learned, because there's another point of view, and actually some of the things we learned were wrong, and a lot of the stuff we didn't learn, we were never taught.
Right.
And we have to be able to take that in, even when it's hard. And sit with that discomfort. One of the things we talk about at the food bank is snuggling up to discomfort, because all this is, for white people, is profoundly uncomfortable. And when I think about it, I think about, okay, well, the BIPOC people in this country have been profoundly uncomfortable every day for hundreds of years.
Right.
So I think I can handle a little bit of discomfort now.
Good for you.
That's a great point. That's a great way to frame the issue too. So we've got a few minutes left here. One of the things we should talk about is where we're going next. We talked about kind of the past year. What does the next year look like? We have federal funds that expired in December. There's a new round of federal funds that is incoming now. What does the next year or two or three look like for the food bank? What kind of things are you going to be focusing on in the near term?
Yeah, well, we will continue to be focusing on equity and racial justice. But as far as kind of our core programs, we're going to be focusing on continuing to be there for the folks when the Wall Street Journal starts reporting that the economy is coming roaring back, and people start thinking that everything's back to normal, whatever that new normal is. We'll still be there reminding you that the lines at the food shelves are still longer than they were before this happened, and that people who lost their jobs and lost all their savings in this pandemic have not built themselves back to the point they were, and that they still need that support
Right.
to be full participants in our communities. And then we want to be better at what we do. We want to come out of this crisis having learned lessons. And I think some of those lessons are that we need to be more responsive. We need to listen more closely to the people that we're serving and be more responsive to their needs, in that we need to be where they are, not say the food shelf is open from 3 to 5 every other Friday. Come and get the food that happens to be there. We need to reach out and say, what do you want? When do you want it? And where do you want it? And we need to figure out how to get there.
Good for you.
And we need to partner more deeply, as I talked about, we've been doing in the Northeast Kingdom. We need to do a lot more of that with organizations that we didn't necessarily see as partners before, but can help us make connections with people in the community whose voices we need to hear.
So, John, have you been getting support through the COVID monies? There's so many different buckets, and the state also has its own COVID relief fund. Are you getting some of that support to help you in what you're doing?
We have, we've been getting a lot of technical support from the state. Of course, we had the GUARD early on, which was state support. We've got the food bank got $4.7 million in CARES Act funding.
Great.
Which was plowed. I talked about $1 million worth of grants out to our network partners. A lot of that was CARES Act funding. A lot of that food purchase was CARES Act funding. There's the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds that are coming now. Now, there's not a meeting of the minds between the administration and the legislature on how that funding is going to be spent.
And yet, on the ARPA funds, there is very little restrictions as opposed to the CARES Act, because maybe that's what happened, because they told you in CARES Act what to do. Yeah. This, they left it open. Right?
So we're working with the legislature and the administration and figuring out how food security works into that. And we will, regardless, we will make sure that there is food out there, and that we're making people aware of the resources that are available, and just encouraging people to not think that they shouldn't reach out for help anymore just because people are vaccinated and businesses are opening again. If you need help, we want you to reach out and find the help that's there.
Right. John, I'm looking at the list of the programs you have, which goes on forever. My favorite is Veggie Van Go. I just think that's the coolest thing. But you've got school meals, you've got the meal programs for us older folk. How old do you have to? What's older in your world?
60.
Oh, oof! I'm really old.
So, you qualify?
Oh my God, you're
I thought
so
you were on
sweet.
the cusp there, Pat.
Oh yeah, right. I got to put my makeup back on. But could you talk about one or two of these, the 3 squares, Vermont Fresh, whatever you think is sort of appropriate for this conversation?
Quickly, 3 squares is SNAP, which used to be known as food stamps. It is the most efficient, effective, and sustainable food support program out there. I really encourage people to check and see if you're eligible for that, and if you are, to sign up for it. And you can do that at our website, vtfoodbank.org. You can find more information. Csfp is the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, and that's also a federal program, and people can contact the food bank if you're over 60 to see if you're income eligible for that program. The others, there's no income eligibility for Veggie Van Go or going to a food shelf. And we really encourage people, again, it's hard. It's hard to ask for help. And particularly, it seems around food, there's a lot of stigma that people feel like they're failing and not being able to support their families and having to go and get food. You'll find smiling people who are thanking you for showing up and taking advantage of the food resources that are there. So please do that. The schools is another place that the federal government has just announced a waiver, which will actually allow every child who goes to school to get a free meal. breakfast and lunch. It doesn't matter what your income is. You don't have to sign up for a program. You go to school, you get fed. We think that that's a key way to reduce hunger, particularly among children, because a lot of people who are eligible for free school meals in Vermont don't sign up for them because of the stigma around eating
I
that
was
food at the
I was
cafeteria.
going to ask you why they chose to do that free food for all kids because but I understand they're just not saying it, are they? And I think to turn a child down for not having money when you've read the is just the most appalling thing I have ever heard. I'd take it out of my own pocket if I had to. But you don't turn a child down because they don't have any money, right?
No,
That's a
no,
bad thing.
yeah.
So
So,
I'm sorry, talk about Veggie Van Go because I think it's so cool to bring fresh food to the kids and let them see.
sure. Veggie Van Go is yeah, all fresh food, mostly fresh produce. We do, boy, probably an average of maybe one a day or two a day
Right.
all around the state. We do those at schools and hospitals mainly. Those are our partners. So um, they're not always at, like, for instance, the one in central Vermont now is used to be at the hospital, but since COVID hit, it's now at the Berry Odd. um,
Ah,
and and it's completely free and people can come, and right now it's a drive-through. Before it was a farmer's market where you could actually walk around to stalls and pick the food that you wanted.
right.
Now you drive through and you get a box of fresh produce and whatever else we have that's appropriate, just tucked in your car and can drive out. Yeah, we love Veggie Van Go, and
I love the vehicle. I love the whole thing. I just think I bet kids just their faces must light up. It's just
yeah.
so cool.
You
It's
know,
great.
one of the great things about it, with the funding we got through the CARES Act, was we were able to add in a lot more Vermont produce than we
Right.
had before, and we're actually working with the legislature to get some more consistent funding for that, so that we can make sure that
Right.
Vermont farmers are being represented in those boxes.
Excellent. Well, that's how as it should be. So I think in the few minutes we have about 7 minutes left. But John, you want to talk about your upcoming events because I think that's really important for people to see and hear what you're doing.
Yes, on May 7th, Friday, May 7th, is our annual Hunger Action Conference. This year it's going to be virtual, online, and you can get information about that at our website again, vtfoodbank.org. Um, and the Hunger Action Conference is really an opportunity for all those network partners, those 300 network partners, and other community advocates to come together and learn about issues related to hunger and the work that we're all doing together. It's open to the public, and we love to have people come and participate. This year, the theme is food justice. So
Oh,
yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and we'll be
yeah.
talking about um, kind of different angles on access to food for people in our communities. The other that registration just opened for our 20th annual
Ooh,
Harpoon Point. Oh, it's not the Harpoon, the Point to Point powered by VSECU, our bike ride, charity bike ride. So you can ride 25, 50, or 100 miles. There's mountain bike
sorry.
rides, there's a run, there's all kinds of great things. I believe we're virtual again this
Right.
year. But it was really successful virtual last year. This way you don't have to drive, from Bennington to Windsor to ride your bike. You just ride in Bennington, and then we have a big online celebration. So
Oh,
again,
cool.
you can just go to pointtopoint.com and learn about that, and shout out to VSCCU, who's our sponsor on that, and
Right.
really makes this happen. And historically it was Harpoon Brewery was a sponsor, and they're
I
still with
remember that.
us. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're still with us. Actually, I just was communicating with the president of Harpoon Brewery today, Charlie Story. So lots of other sponsors, but people who like to ride and bike, mountain bike, road bike, run, walk, whatever you can do, check out the Point to Point powered by VSECU.
We'll
That's
definitely do
great.
that.
Yeah, I'm for sure going to look at the hunger action thing. That sounds really interesting. Do you have keynote speakers and stuff, John, or just hearing from your members?
Because we're virtual this year, we're not having a keynote speaker, but we've got some really interesting sessions that you can pop in on and learn all about food
Oh,
justice.
great.
You can learn about grant writing too.
Oh, that's it. That's the key.
Now you got
There
Patsy.
are so many grants coming from the state because of the federal dollars, and that's it. That's a skill.
Yeah.
It really is how to write a grant. That's a great thing. People should, especially like the smaller towns that don't have the staff,
That's
they
right.
should learn how to do that.
We have a lot of small, food shelves and other
Yeah.
organizations, and we want to make sure that they're finding the money they need to do their work.
Now I know I asked this question and I'm going to be embarrassed. I don't think the other food banks do not report into you, do they? You just work with them closely, but they're independent.
That's
or
right.
Are they under your umbrella?
No, we are partners, but all of our partners, the food shelves and meal sites, are all 501c3 organizations or faith-based organizations. So yeah, we don't govern them. They're all independent organizations, but we all partner together.
I love seeing the big trucks that come through the town with the Vermont Food Bank.
You more or less help assist with distribution to those sites, right? That kind of how the relationship works.
That's right. You could see us. We do direct distribution too with Veggie Van Go and some other things, but we're also kind of, you could say, the wholesale provider to your local food shelf, where that big truck rolls up and we'll drop off pallets of food there.
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, John, thank you. Any other final thoughts? Just volunteer and give. I think that's a good message, right?
Volunteer and give. We people are extremely generous, but this is going to be a long haul for our Vermont neighbors when it comes to food and housing too, I think. And we do rely on donations to make all this work happen. So you can get more information at vtfoodbank.org and volunteer and advocate. Make sure that your state legislators and our federal delegation know that you care about the issue of hunger, because it makes a difference.
You know what I love, and we didn't talk about it quickly, is your gleaning program. If you've got some fruit trees that you don't know what to do with all the apples and the pears, you call and this group comes and picks all the apples, picks all the pears, and then tells you what food bank it went to, how many pounds they picked, and it really makes you feel like you've actually done something worthwhile. I keep hoping my tree this year, we trimmed it back, will just go out of control so I can call them again.
Yeah, gleaning's starting up, and for the food bank gleaning opportunities, again, you can go to our website, vtfoodbank.org, and we have volunteers that go out into farmers' fields and pick food that would not otherwise be harvested, and it goes straight to your local food shelves.
It's awesome. John, you were doing such a fabulous job. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben, thanks for joining us. It was good to see you, and we'll see you all next week. We have a little announcement next week, so stay tuned. In the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.